courageous conversation with Dr. Clara Stevens. We seek to extend a beacon of hope to those wrestling with everyday life issues. Our approach is rooted in empathetic listening and compassionate, non-judgmental conversations. Judge not, that you be not judged. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Matthew 7:1, John 8:32.
In this episode, we are sharing tips for coping with grief resulting from the loss of loved ones, significant others, job, health, friends, betrayers, income, and individual or family pet. Part 1. What is loss? According to the psychology tools, when we talk about loss, we often mean the death of someone that we love. Loss essentially leads to grieving. However, it is essential to understand that loss is not limited to the death of loved ones. People can also experience grief when confronted with other losses, such as the breakup of a relationship, the loss of an important role, such as a job, or the diagnosis of a life-changing illness. Now, loss falls in two categories. Psychological loss include the death of a loved one, divorce, loss of purpose, and more. Second, physical loss include health, job, home, possessions, and more. Both types of losses represent loss that brings change into an individual's life, often leading to grief. However, grief is not limited to death. People can have intense sorrow, reactions to any loss. Some of the following are types of grief commonly experienced by those with whom we minister. Types of loss and losses within the loss. When someone dies, you might experience many losses. Part of grieving is about recognizing what you have lost. And loss comes with many changes that are not always immediately visible. There is the physical loss of the person and their presence, and other less tangible losses, such as the loss of a shared life consisting of what you did together for each other. Next, the loss of a shared future together, including your shared hopes, dreams, and plans for the future. Another loss include the loss of your shared social life, the loss of all that you loved one did together. There might have been ones who fix problems around the house or who manage the finances of the family. Are you or someone you know grieving? So what is grief? Grief is experiencing numerous physical, psychological, emotional, social, behavioral, and spiritual responses to some loss. Grief is more than just sadness, and one might be overwhelmed by various emotions and feelings in the body as the grief changes over time. Grief is different for everyone. Everyone deals with grief in a unique way. Now we're going to look into types of grief. Obviously, griefs are we have several differences when it comes to grieving. Number one, traumatic grief, such following a sudden and unexpected death. The griever's normal coping mechanisms are either depleted or overtaxed by the tragedy. Understandably so, the family in question, upon hearing the news of the tragedy, may become utterly shattered, distraught, and devastated. In such a devastating situation, all you can do in your effort to provide comfort is to provide what we call the ministry of presence and compassionate care. Do not try to provide answers to several questions asked by close relations. Such questions often include, I don't know what to do. I cannot live without him or her. What am I going to do now? And so on. Be present to provide hugs. Cry with family. Bring water or snacks or other needs you deem fit. Or be there for the family. Your supportive presence will be cherished and remembered for a long time. Second, non-finite grief. This grief is associated with losing hopes, wishes, ideas, and future expectations. It also includes unexpected news of the diagnosis of a chronic illness or developmental or neurological deficit in a family member. Also experienced by parents of children diagnosed with autism, Down syndrome, hearing loss, seizure disorder, or other disabilities. 3. Ambiguous loss. There is no record of death or assurance of the individual's return. Example: 1. A missing person resulting from kidnapping, loss at war, natural disasters, terrorist attacks, hijacked planes, or simply disappearing without a trace from family life. It also includes abandonment, a child given up for adoption. I belong to this group. I was adopted at 12 years old. And parental absence through a divorce, which could also be identified as an ambiguous loss. The loss does not include the physical, yet create an intense psychological presence with continuing consternation, a sudden, alarming amazement or dread resulting in dismay, panic, fear, confusion, and anxiety about the individual. Example 2. This explains the experience endured when the loved one is present but not present. So you're saying, Dr. Stevens, what do you mean? I am saying, in this situation, the person is still here with us, but also not here. Such as when a loved one has a cognitive impairment, suffers from dementia, a stroke, or some traumatic injury to the brain. Ambiguous loss has no closure, but we must learn to live with ambiguity. Although the effects of grief may be relentless, there is little resolutions. Number 3, anticipatory grief. As the name implies, in anticipation of loss, including news of divorce proceeding and diagnosis of terminal illness of a loved one, the shock is great when a loved one dies. Regardless of preparation for the inevitable, one can provide comfort and support for families dealing with anticipatory grief. The news of sudden diagnosis can be distressing, including a return terminal cancer and the prognosis that the individual stage 4 cancer had metastasized to all of stomach and organs. Hence, advice such as putting the house in order. Often, family members gather to offer a compassionate presence. No matter the preparation in place of anticipatory grief, and speaking from personal experience, there is no better way to prepare for a loved one's death. My mother's death was sudden. My father was prolonged. Sudden or expected long illness may eventually lead to death. We can only maintain hope. We never accept or prepare for death when it strikes. Mish Carmody stated that one cannot anticipate the pain of separation, no matter how it happens. Sudden death and long-term illness are two side roads that merge into the same main road of survivor to accept the unacceptable. Next, normal grief. The typical and immediate following reaction involved when people receive the news that a loved one has died. The grievers often equate the grieving moment with abnormality, in which they sometimes question their sanity, irrational thoughts of going crazy. There is a constant eruption of several emotional consistencies and several emotional, that is, inconsistencies and volatile and uncharacteristic behavior. Normal grievers identify with overwhelming feeling that their world has turned upside down. Nothing seems normal, and they feel like losing their minds. They are grieving rather than losing their mind. Grievers' outward reaction include aggressiveness, sleep abnormality, loss of appetite, crying, and susceptibility to illness. Emotional responses of shock, fear, sadness, numbness, anger, loneliness, and hopelessness frequently occur. Mental confusion, forgetfulness, being in a daze, and lack of concentration. Individual could be seen crying hysterically and rolling on the floor. In such case, please Clear the space and guard against chairs, tables, and sharp objects to be sure no accidents. Others could exclaim that there was nothingness to live for, because they are unable to fathom how to continue living with such loss. There is no doubt that such a grievous life has changed forever. The best way to minister to such an individual is through the ministry of presence and compassionate understanding. Lastly, complicated grief. Grief is classified as complicated when it becomes chronic and disabling and morphs into major depression. Complicated grief identifies with features of post-traumatic stress disorder, including nightmares and flashbacks. Robert et al. Wrote poems which explains the sorrow that accompanies grief as, and I quote, "I walk a mile with pleasure. She chattered all the way, but left me none the wiser. For all she had to say, I walk a mile with sorrow, and not a word said she. But oh, the things I learned from her when sorrow walked with me." Unquote. The report released by Journal of the American Medical Association recalls that about 10 to 20% of people grieving the loss of a loved one experience complicated grief. Following such a loss, the acute state of mourning will subside. Individuals may remain inconsolable and may never find a substitute. No matter what may fill the gap, even if it is filled, it nevertheless remains something else. And actually, this is how it should be. It is the only way of perpetuating that love which we do not want to relinquish. Sigmund Freud. Now, let's look into individual grieving process. People do not necessarily grieve the same way. The personality types of profiles provide an excellent example of why the way different people grieve is not necessarily consistent with another person.